Okay, well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining me today. I have been helping out the Society with the grants process now for probably coming up towards a year. And one of the things we thought it might be useful to do, particularly for fellows, is to have a session where we explain a bit more about our grants, the sort of things we fund, some of the projects we funded in the past, and also a bit of a, I suppose, a grant surgery or a space to ask questions about applying for grants in future. So today I'm going to be talking to you, first of all, an introduction to our grants and awards, the different types of grants that we have available. Then I'm going to be talking about some of our previously funded projects, particularly things over the past couple of years, again, to give a sort of a very brief summary of the real range of grants, the range of types of projects that we do support at the Society. And obviously, this is all things that, as fellows, your membership goes towards supporting as well. So hopefully of interest of the different types of projects that we do fund and make a real difference in research in Scotland for. And then I'm going to talk about our grant guidance. So a bit more detail about the things we do fund, things that are in our guidance, and the process of how we go about the grants process. It's changed slightly recently. So instead of just having one grant round each year, we now have a couple of rounds each year. So I'm going to talk a bit about that in terms of timetable and some of the procedures that we go to. And then I'm going to talk in a bit of detail about the application form. So a bit of top tips in terms of filling in the application form, the sort of things that our Grants and Awards Committee who make the decisions are looking for when they come to read all the applications each grant round. And then afterwards, there'll be time for questions and discussion as well. So we have a number of grants and awards that are available each year. In the main, we have actually one grant pot. So although on our website, you'll see a number of named grants. So here we have the grants pot, we have a Young and Student Fellow grant, the Angus Graham grant, the Sir George MacDonald grant, and the Gunning Jubilee gift. They all essentially come out of the same grant pot of funding. So these are available to anybody, not just fellows, but fellows and non-fellows can apply for these. We only really, like I say, for these, it all comes out of one pot. So although we are likely to award some grants as named grants, so for example, this year we awarded one grant, which was the Sir George MacDonald grant, which was to support specific work on Roman occupation in Scotland, which was awarded to Dr. Tanya Romankovic at Edinburgh University to look at a project on in the Iron Age communities in the Scottish borders and their connections with the Western Roman Empire. We also awarded an award, the Gunning Jubilee gift, which was awarded to Louise Heron, who is looking at she's writing a book entitled A History of Scotland in 15 Violent Crimes. And this is to enable her to carry out research visits to the National Records and National Library of Scotland. So we have a range of grants that you can apply for, but in general, feel free to apply for the general grant for any project and a named grant if it's appropriate to you. The only one that is specifically for fellows is the Young and Student Fellow grants, and this is there very much to support student, early career fellows of the Society. And I believe it's students and under 26 people, and generally we support either visits for research, but also visits, for example, to a conference and costs with that as well. We do have two additional grants, which I'm going to talk a little bit more further on and talk about in more detail, but these are separate pots of money, so not out of our main grant fund. One is the Dr. Ewan Mackay Legacy Fund, which is there to provide scientific analysis, funding for scientific analysis, particularly relating to Neolithic to Iron Age Scotland. And then we have our newest grant, which is the Audrey Henschel Legacy Fund, which has Audrey left the Society a very generous bequest to develop and undertake impactful research on pre-Roman archaeology in Scotland. And I'll mention a bit more about that grant later on. And the Society also has a number of awards. These are there primarily to award people for providing the best, or considered the best paper, usually for our Proceedings of Society Antiquaries journal each year. Some of the awards are awarded biennially and some annually. So we have the Chalmers Device Prize, which is awarded for the best paper on any subject in prehistory of archaeology of Scotland up until AD 1100. We have the RBK Stevenson Award, offered annually, a recognition of a paper that best reflects his research interests. As many of you know, he was the keeper for many years of the National Museum of Antiquaries of Scotland and former president of this society as well. And we have the Murray Prize for History, which is awarded every 2 years on a paper on the history of Scotland from the medieval to the early medieval periods. And then we have a couple of other funds, lecture funds. So we have the regional fund, book and fund for lectures, which again, we can help support funding lectures in other parts of Scotland, which are not currently served by society meetings. So that might be something you might wish to consider applying for. And then every 3 years, we award the Dorothy Marshall Medal as well to an individual who, usually in a voluntary capacity, has made a significant contribution to Scottish archaeology or related work. So through our grants, we support a really wide range of research, and on our website, you will find the grants pages, and there is a collection there of short summaries of some of our some of the research that has been supported by our grants over the years. We hope to add more to this over time. We're hoping our new website will be ready soon. And so we've got a bit of a backlog of new research articles to post on our new website when that becomes live, which will keep it a bit more up to date with some of the recent research from 2000 and from 2022 to 2023 as well. But in the meantime, there's a really good selection on our website of brief summaries of the many different types of projects that we have supported over the past, I think, around 10 years. I'm just going to give you some very brief highlights of some of the projects that we have funded, particularly over the past 2 years. So maybe ones that don't yet have articles up on our website. So we're going to start way back in time. So many of you might be aware of the work of Professor Karen Hardy that's been carried out on the Isle of Skye over the past few years. So they've been working, and her team have been working on a site with evidence of human occupation right from the late Upper Paleolithic through the early and into the late Mesolithic period, so occupied by humans for at least 5,000 years. So it's a really interesting site, several of them in Skye, and things finding sort of new diagnostic evidence of certain types of, particularly, well, say, baked mudstone, which is thought to be excavated, quarried from Staffin on the north of Skye, being used as the primary raw material in the early Mesolithic on the Isle of Skye. So if you want to find out more about this project, the Society has supported, I think, for 3 years now. She has recently produced an article for the next edition of the Proceedings of the Society for PSAS. For those of you maybe don't know, this year for the first time we're actually releasing articles in advance of the actual paper, the actual book being produced, which will come out at the end of November, like every year. But there were already a number of pre-releases of papers which are available on our publication part of our website, which includes this paper by Karen Hardy and colleagues on the site of South Pruderack, I think is how you say it, in the Isle of Skye. But this is really nationally significant work, looking at this sort of very late Paleolithic, Mesolithic transition, and some of the earliest inhabitants or sites of inhabitation that we know about in Scotland. Other prehistoric projects we supported in the past couple of years. Many of you may have either been in attendance or watched on YouTube the talk given by Graham Warren last year about some of his work. We've supported his work and colleagues from University College Dublin, and I think also the University of Stranraer in Norway, and Rosie Bishop, who's based out there. And they've been doing work alongside the community group of Mesolithic Deeside up in the Cairngorms, where they've been carried out excavations, small pit excavations over the past couple of years, looking again for Mesolithic activity. Last year, they found over 300 very small flints, sort of microlith microliths, some of them which you can see in the top corner of this slide here. They're going back, hopefully, as well, to do more augering, get more environmental samples. But it's a sort of really interesting project of looking for Mesolithic activity in areas where it's maybe previously not been found before. So again, pushing back what we know about the earliest peoples living in Scotland. And another Mesolithic project as well, led by Steve Mythen on the Isle of Islay, looking again over a number of years of fieldwork that we've supported, again looking for evidence of early human settlement. And they have a site there, a really well stratified site that goes right back to the very early Mesolithic, possibly even earlier, and a real sequence, because it's well stratified, of the different types of microliths. So our latest grant to this project is to enable a specialist to work through the lithic assemblage and compare it with the stratigraphy, and try and pull out in a bit more detail the sequence and the timescale of the people who are living on this site, again over many years. And I believe a talk by Steve is on our YouTube channel that he did for the Society, again a year or two ago, about this very site. And finally, another project we funded this year, although sadly the fieldwork has had to be postponed until 2024, was a project by Will McGarry on Neolithic quarrying in Shetland. So over a few years now, work has been undertaken by Queen's University and Belfast to look particularly at fellsite production on the island of North Row, which is part of Shetland. And again, they've worked with the community group Archaeology Shetland to excavate a number of sort of small sites, small structures, to look at evidence for the people who were there quarrying fellsite on this site of North Row. And sort of at the end of their previous season, they were able to get a date from a hearth in one of the structures that gives us a last date of use for the Middle Bronze Age. But they're going back this year now to continue excavating these structures and to find out more information about the quarrying work and the people who lived on North Row at this time. We also fund quite a lot of post-excavation analysis, so not just field work in terms of archaeology. A couple of examples here. One is pollen analysis from Gilchrist Marsh. This is from a site, a promontory fort site, I think in Aberdeenshire, which is part of the Taradale Through Time project. And support from the Society enabled sort of full pollen analysis through this core that was taken. The core goes back, well, dates back as far as middle Neolithic and goes right through to the present day. So the combination of pollen analysis and radiocarbon dating has really been able to reveal sort of much about the extensive landscape changes over time, from diverse woodland, mixed woodland, to extensive grassland, following the woodland loss, changes in land use, farming practice, and how things have changed right through from medieval, from the Neolithic to the medieval times, and helps put excavations at this promontory fort, this sort of Iron Age promontory fort, into a wider context, a wider landscape context. And we've also funded reassessment from old excavations. So we funded Marta Innes to do a re-evaluation of a pottery assemblage from Clackbreck, which are kists in Argyll. So it was a Bronze Age pottery assemblage found in a number of kists around this area. So she was able to bring together a really full and detailed pottery report with accompanying catalogue, with detailed artefact illustrations, one of which you see here, which will hopefully be eventually published in the proceedings. But it was something to actually bring together this, which had been excavated many years ago, but now we have a sort of full synopsis. And this has also helped them, these Bronze Age artifacts, Bronze Age pots, are also now on display in the Kilmartin Museum in their new redisplays that have recently opened at the end of last year. So the work has been useful not only for understanding of the Bronze Age pottery, but also for helping with interpretation and new museum displays as well. Moving up towards the medieval period, Lindsay McGill at National Museums of Scotland did a small project on these 3 octagonal brooches, all in the collections of NMS, but not really very much was known about them. So the funding paid for Marion Campbell, an expert in medieval brooches, to come up to Scotland to really study these brooches, obviously by eye, magnifying glass, microscope, weighing, measurements, and really trying to get to understand them better. And the upshot of this research, they believe one is an original medieval brooch, and the other 2 are potentially copies, not modern copies, but copies maybe made a few years, 50 years, 100 years after the original one was made, and maybe a jeweler was commissioned to replicate these. They're probably unlikely to have been deliberately misleading replicas, but somebody for some reason wanted to recreate this relatively unusual style of brooch. And then last year we also funded some research as part of the 12 Towers of Rule project. So the Valley of Rule is in the Scottish borders. It's in one of these really interesting positions that has been English or Scottish at various times throughout the medieval period, so a real sort of borderland area. And the grant funded work by Professor Richard Oram and Tom Turpey into all the archival records, so they could build up a picture of the development of everyday life of this sort of rural borders community around the site of this Bedrule castle, I think. So to build up a sort of a picture and a full archival record of the people who are known to have been in control of this valley or lived in this valley, and how the use of it changed over time. And this is part of a much bigger project. It was in the news recently. There's been a call for a new national park in Scotland, and a potential Scottish Borders National Park, which includes the Valley of Rule, is part of this. So some of this archival work went into supporting this new application to be a new Scottish National Park. And they have a really interesting website. If you search for 12 Towers of Rule, you can find much more information about their project as well. But as well as sort of the archaeological, the sort of artifactual evidence as well, we also support a range of, I suppose, archival work. We sort of, just to give you a taste of some of the most recent projects that we funded. We funded a project looking at the Scots in Rome, so Scots who travelled to Rome in the 18th century. So a researcher was able to come, Marion Ambillard was able to come to Edinburgh for 2 weeks to research travel accounts, letters, diaries, drawings, and paintings made by Scots who visited Rome in the 18th century. And this is forming the basis of a book that she's midway of writing at the moment. We've had work on topics such as female migrant mill workers, who were housed in asylums and poorhouses in Dundee at the late 19th century. And this work was carried out by Christo Dolidis, I think, who came over from Italy to do some work in Dundee and Edinburgh, looking at the archives of women who most often travelled from either Ireland or from the Highlands to Dundee to work in the mills in Dundee. And we also had research by Joe Rock last year, who looked at the houses of the Earls of Galloway, and so based obviously in Dumfries and Galloway, but specifically looking at the site of Glasserton House. Going through all archival correspondence and documentation for this house. There was a house known to be there probably from around 1576 right until it was demolished in 1949. But as many of these houses went through a series of renovations and upgrades over the time, so there's now a really detailed archival history, which has been brought together by Joe about this quite sort of important architectural house that now sadly no longer exists. And just to bring us right up to date, just to give an example again of the wide breadth of projects that we fund. These are our most recent projects, or some of our most recent projects. Last week, our notice of our new grants awards, so ones that were awarded in January of this year, and went up on our website, so you could read all about our most recent grant funded projects, of which work will be carried out hopefully in 2024. But a real mixture, so from working at the Cairns, Brock Village site, that you can see in the bottom corner there, to creating a leaflet about wartime Orkney. So this will be number 4 in a series of leaflets looking at the northern defences in Orkney. A project that I mentioned, I think earlier, History of Scotland in 15 Violent Crimes. We have projects looking at excavations at Bemerside, which is an Iron Age site, most likely around at the same time as some of the early Roman sites, such as Tremontium in the Scottish borders, for instance. So a real range of projects, and you can find out all about our most recent projects that have been awarded funding on our latest news post on the Society's website. Just to mention a couple of the other funds that aren't part of the main grants fund. So we have the Ewan Mackay Legacy Fund, and this is particularly set up by a grant bequest from himself to provide scientific analyses, particularly radiocarbon dates, but also things like isotopic analysis as well, relating to Neolithic or right through to Iron Age Scotland, with a particular emphasis on Brock's, Duns, forts, which were areas of his personal interest. So some of the projects we funded through this particular grant are isotope analysis of human bone collagen from chambered cairn in Orkney. We've recently funded radiocarbon dates from the Fairy now Brock, Iron Age Brock in Stirlingshire. And this year, like I've mentioned, we're dating an Iron Age occupation in Bermyside Hill as well, in borders. And our most recent, our newest fund that we have available is the Audrey Henschel Legacy Fund. So she was incredibly generous in leaving the Society a bequest, and her wish was that it would be used to fund significant, impactful work in archaeology in Scotland during the pre-Roman period. So we recently advertised an opportunity to fund the project of one or more major projects up to a total of £50,000 to develop and undertake impactful research on pre-Roman archaeology in Scotland. We've been assessing those applications for that project recently, and we'll be working on the next stages. But we will also be able to have available, as part of her generous bequest, smaller grants of up to £10,000, which will be available in due course. So if this is a particular area of your expertise, interest, or projects, keep an eye out for these grants coming through. We're only likely to have one probably every 2 to 3 years for this particular grant, but we're hoping over time these projects will make a really significant addition to our knowledge of prehistory in Scotland, and be a really fitting legacy for Audrey and all the work that she did. So now I'm going to come on to grant guidelines and just explain a wee bit about our grants themselves before we come on to talk about the application form. So the Society supports high quality research and publication relating to Scotland's past by making several of these grants awards each year. So all of the grants are available on a competitive basis, and they can be used towards the costs of pretty much any archaeological or historical research relating to Scotland. We do not fund rescue archaeological fieldwork. It has to be planned research. And applications are welcome from fellows and non-fellows. We also consider applications for publication costs or potentially outreach activity as well. So we're particularly interested in projects that do maybe have a combination of an outreach aspect as well. But the main thing is that the projects are sort of congruent with the Society's main sort of visions and aims and mission statements. All decisions are made by the Grants Awards Committee, and the committee is made up of at least 5 members of our council, of which Suzanne, who's joined us today, is the chair of that committee. So we are committed to working towards equality and accessibility in the Scottish heritage sector and beyond. I want very much to encourage open access research, and we want very much to contribute to costs where possible to try and get rid of the financial barrier. We want to share the research. So once we've helped pay for the research and helps it actually the research take place, we want to make sure it's spread as widely as possible. So again, having some aspect of publication or including costs for open access research within your application is something that we're very happy to consider. In the case of historical projects, we may have more of a preference towards those projects that incorporate some aspect relating to material culture. You know, as the Society of Antiquaries name suggests, material culture is something that is very sort of important in a lot of the work that we support. But it's not solely material culture. We will consider other aspects. And we also ask applicants to consider how research contributes to existing research frameworks and agendas. Is there already questions that are being asked, or are the people asking questions? How does this research you're doing fit into the bigger picture? And as I'll come on to say, we also are starting now to consider much more the climatic impact of research as well. And these are all things that we sort of take in, or the committee take into consideration when looking at the applications. As I mentioned at the start, the timetable for grants has now changed. So instead of just a single date for applications, we now have 2 grant applications each year. So we now have one deadline for the 30th of April, which is the next deadline coming up for people who are considering applying. And then the second one on the 30th of November, which is the date we've traditionally had as our grant deadline, which is the same day as obviously as our AGM and St Andrew's Day. But we've also made our process to awards grants much quicker. So there's much quicker turnaround for decisions to be made and communicated. So for applications received by the end of November, we will hope to tell you whether you've been successful or not by the end of January, which is much quicker. Previously, the November applications, we wouldn't be able to let people know if they were successful normally until the end of March, beginning of April, due to the timetabling of committee meetings, council meetings within the society. But we've been able to speed that up. And similarly, with applications submitted by the 30th of April, we'll be able to communicate decisions by the end of June. We tend to award grants up to a maximum of £3,000. There are occasional exceptions where it goes above this, but that is normally the maximum we consider each year. And usually most grants are in the region of sort of £1,500 to £2,500. So I'm now going to just talk a bit about the application form, and this is sort of based on sort of some feedback we get from the Grants and Awards Committee when looking at the applications, and maybe some of the common things that maybe people don't always fill in correctly, or maybe aren't clear enough. Or so I'm sort of going to go through a few of the key things on the application form that is really important to fill in properly. Some of them are self-explanatory. So obviously, project title, give us a nice title for your project. Please tell us how much the grant you're requesting from us at the top of the application form, and then obviously your personal details. The first big box to fill in is the description of the project, which is down at the bottom of this picture here. And we ask you to present the overall aims of the project in brief, but very specifically, we want to detail the specific programme of work and outcomes for which the society grant is requested. So we do want to know how the project, the big picture of the project, the overall aims of a wider project, but we very much want to know the money that the society is paying for the grant, exactly what is that going to be spent on. So that is really important to do that. We want to know why this project is important, tell us the impact, tell us the outcomes. What are you going to achieve by doing this research? What new information are you going to be able to share with everybody once this work has been completed? Why is it important? Has this work been done before? Are you maybe following an exemplar of really good practice? Has somebody recommended this work is carried out? So just tell us a bit more about why this work needs to be done. And then again, if you have partners in the project as well, explain their role in the project and how a number of partners are maybe going to work on the same project. But it's important to give us the overall aims of a big project, but very specifically exactly how the money the society is going to give for this grant is going to be spent. The next part of the form is the budget funding. It says here, please emphasise and detail what the grant is going to support. We really want to see a quite detailed budget at this stage. We don't really want rounded up or ballpark figures. We would really like you to get quotes for things in advance, so we have, quite detailed costings. We understand, for example, if the costs of travel and things do change and go up and down. But we would like you to have got a quote. So rather than just, I think, a train from London to Edinburgh is going to cost me around £200. We want to know that you've actually looked and you've got a realistic quote of what things are going to cost, whether it's accommodation, whether it's scientific analysis, whether it's travel. So please get quotes and provide a detailed budget. It might sound obvious, but please make sure the figures add up. We do sometimes get applications come in where people have put lots of figures in, and then total budget, and then the total amount, they just sort of don't quite add up. This leaves lots of questions. Is it just a case of the math not quite working properly? Has something been missed out on this part of the application form? So please double check your figures, and also make sure that the total figure is also the same as the total grant requested from the society at the top of the application form, because again, occasionally that isn't the case, and it can lead to a bit of confusion as to exactly how much money a project is looking for from the society. There's a section on the application form that asks you to explain, where applicable, how a project relates to either the Scottish Archaeological Research Framework, so SCARF, or other research frameworks agendas as appropriate. So for archaeological projects, people do tend to go to SCARF and are able to fill in this form quite well in terms of how work relates to research questions, research recommendations, and SCARF. However, I think people forget that SCARF goes right through to the modern period. So often when we get applications looking for sort of 18th, 19th, 20th century projects, this box can sometimes just be left totally blank. SCARF has a really excellent modern chapter. The National Modern Chapter covers lots of issues in terms of research, in terms of people, society, sort of economics, so a whole architecture, a whole range of things. So really, even if you're doing a project that you consider maybe to be more historical, please do check out the SCARF modern chapter particularly, and also other parts of SCARF. We have a section on the long 19th century cultures in Europe, so Scotland and European connections, which was a project carried out by the University of Strathclyde. But again, that framework is really useful for the more recent work. And there are other research agendas frameworks out there as well. So if your project really doesn't have any link to SCARF, maybe look at what other research frameworks or agendas it might link to, because this helps support your application in terms of showing us how it fits into the bigger picture and how it's important. It's an important piece of research, impactful and necessary to do. If your work involves travel, we'd like you to explain a wee bit how you've considered to maybe reduce your climate impact, your carbon footprint. So have you maybe, instead of flying, have you considered taking a train? Have you considered other options? If your work involves travel to do particularly archival research, check if these have already been digitised. Are they likely to be digitised in the future? Could the society maybe help pay for them to be digitised? So that not only helps you as a researcher, but it will also help people in future to be able to research the same archival resource as well. We're not saying that we will not fund. We do fund plenty of people to travel to archives to do research and be hands-on with the material we want to research. So it's not that we do not fund travel for archives, because we do, but we would like you to consider now your carbon footprint and climate impact of your research. And sometimes research itself considers climate implications as well. So a lot of particularly archaeological work, for instance, nowadays is looking at climate change in the past and how that may relate to the present. So this would be useful to incorporate that into this box here if that suits your project. And then we also want to know, we're very keen to support a wide range of projects which benefit very different groups and different interests. So we want to share research with as many people as possible. So things like, is the work you do, is it going to be open access? Are you able to share it either through websites, through blogs, through social media? Maybe if you're doing an archaeological excavation, are you able to have open days on site? Are you able to do talks, involve wider members of the community? So in this box here, this is the sort of thing that we're looking for. How are we going to try and make your research as widely available and to be shared with and used by as many different people as possible? And this goes on to sharing reports. So again, please outline your publication plans if you plan to publish in proceedings or in another journal, if you plan to write a book, if you plan to do a website, a weblog, explain how you're going to share this information. And we are, as we said before, particularly keen on open access, sharing it freely and as widely as possible. We also ask you to check permissions for works. Again, sometimes maybe people wish to do work with museums, on collections in museums or in archives in libraries, for instance. Before you make an application to us, we really want you to contact those museums, contact those libraries, and check and ask if it's okay, if they have the capacity to enable you access to maybe collections, so that we know that all these permissions and things are set up in advance of your application, And because occasionally somebody thinks they may be able to go to a museum and look at every, say, medieval brooches, because that was on a previous slide, but actually when it comes to it, they haven't actually checked if this is possible, if something they can, museum can actually accommodate. So please say if you have permissions and outline this. Ditto for field work, if you need scheduled monument consent from a body like HET, for instance. So make sure all these things are explained to us in the application. And specifically for the Ewan Mackay Legacy Fund, please provide full details. We're looking at this is for scientific analysis work, so please provide full details of samples you want to analyse, of what you want to analyse them for, stratigraphy, context, whether there's been previous analysis done on similar samples from the site. Have you already got some good results so we know the material you want to analyse is suitable for analysis in the future? So again, the more detail you can provide about this, the less questions the committee will have when they come to read the application form. So just the last couple of slides. So this is really sort of top tips, I suppose. The Grants and Awards Committee cannot make assumptions. They base their decisions on the application form that they are reading in front of them, and they're comparing all the application forms they receive at any one time after each grant round, sort of with each other. So the Grants and Awards, they cannot make assumptions or think, oh, maybe they've considered that, or maybe, you know, tell them exactly what they need to know really clearly on the application form. Really emphasize the importance and impact of a project. Why is this project important? Why does it need to be done? Relate it to the key society aims and objectives. So the society's interests, the Society of Antiquaries, and the work that we do. So relate your project to that. If applying for a named grant, just check it fills the specific criteria. And make sure you say how it relates to wider research agendas and frameworks. As well as the importance of a project, we want to know the outcomes of the project. So what things are we going to find out? What research is going to be out there? What, you know, are many people going to come to your project? We want to know the outcomes as well. So make sure they're really clear. The obvious one is costs. Make sure they're clear, make sure they're outlined in detail, make sure they've been quoted for, and make sure they add up. I also say we do have our grant guidance as well as the application form are available to download on the website. So also, before you start making an application form, read the guidance. There is lots of detail in the guidance, both about the application itself, but also some of the terms and conditions for the grants, which I don't have the time to talk to you about today. But take time to read the guidance before you make an application. And just finally, we are here to help. So I'm the grants, I suppose, coordinator, administrative for the society, and I'm available through the grants email address that you can find on our website, or through my own email address at helen@sophens.org as well. So get in touch with me for advice. I can advise on the application in terms of I can read through a draft and I can maybe suggest areas that are missing. Obviously, I can't help you write it, but I could maybe say, oh, you maybe need to add this in. Or so do feel free, as long as you give me plenty of time in advance to send me a draft before the deadline, and I can maybe help advise in some ways. The grants are competitive, so just as a guide, roughly 50% of applications were funded in the November 2023 round. So we only have a finite amount of money as well. So sometimes your application actually still may be really good, but it just didn't make the cut that year. So we will tend to give feedback, particularly where applications were good, but they just didn't quite make the cut. So again, get in touch and we will be able to give feedback and hopefully help you to resubmit in a following year. So that was really all I wanted to say today, but hopefully that's given you a good understanding or a summary of the society grants and particularly the application process, and I'm very open to taking questions, I think, as is Suzanne as well, so thank you.